unity. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion, and compassion. Come, let us enter this place with the stories of ancestors, for their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space, present to the beloved companions who move beside us. Come into this space, mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space and let us worship. Those opening words are the words of Katie Romano Griffin. And now I invite you, the Soul Singers are going to lead us in our opening song, number 1003, which is in the Teal book, Where Do We Come From? Anything else that I need to tell people? Just give them a moment, and we'll all join them.
She has bronchitis, so I'm jumping in at the last moment to help out.
Okay, perhaps it was a stretch for us to try to join in, but that was great. I would ask you to rise, though, for the lighting of the chalice and join in those words and remain standing for the doxology.
Oh, is this on? Is this on? Let this flame be to us a symbol of the wholeness we speak.
Its brightness dispelling gloom, lighting a path to faith and hope.
Its glow reminding us of the sacred bonds that link us to all living things.
It is calling us to life, the light of freedom, justice, and peace on all. Good morning and welcome, welcome, welcome. I am the Reverend Susan Milner. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and it is my honor and pleasure to serve as interim minister to this historic congregation. We gratefully acknowledge the Patuxet Wampanoag people on whose ancestral lands we gather today. We commit to support and honor their history, their culture. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I just read in the Boston Globe that the greatest saturation of Irish heritage is not in Boston, but on the South Shore, so it's perfect. It may be gloomy, but it's St. Patrick's Day. We do welcome all of you, members, friends, newcomers, those who are on Zoom. We are so glad you can be here. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, whatever your age, whatever your personal practices of meditation or prayer, whatever your theology, for this 1 hour you are part of this congregation, or at least we want you to feel that way, and you are very welcome. Everyone is invited, as usual, to coffee hour following the service in the assembly hall through these doors and down at that end of the building. When you get there, if you're a visitor and you feel comfortable doing so, please take one of the red mugs so that we can, those of us who have been around a little longer, can identify you and offer you a warm First Parish greeting. I think Cindy Fiorini has an announcement. Oh.
Hi. If you probably, hopefully saw in the distros in the last couple of weeks, we're having a really important after-church meeting at 11:30, and to discuss the future of our parsonage. I had originally scheduled it for the parlor, but I'm moving it down to the chapel. So at 11:30, after you've had something to drink and eat and chat with a few people, come on down to the chapel. We'll be starting pretty much right on time. Thank you.
And now, so that they can get on to their own chapel and their morning's program, we're going to sing our children and young people out and go now in peace. As many of you are aware, perhaps, we are coming up on our stewardship campaign in this church, and for a few mornings, we are having what I'm calling reflections on being here, short reflections on what it means to be a member of this church, and this morning, David Murphy is going to grace us with his.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm David Murphy, and with my last name, you might think that I am Catholic, but I grew up unchurched. When Gail and I moved to Duxbury, it became natural to go to the church where Gail grew up and where we got married. Our son John grew up in this church too. I want to tell you the biggest surprise of my adult life is that I'm a member of any church. It's true. Here, there's no dogma. I'm not told what to believe. I like coming to this church. I like the people here. And I like coming into the church from the back of the sanctuary because I get to see this magnificent structure with the high ceilings, with no obstructed view, no icons to be seen. When John was young, I admit that Gail carried the load with the teaching collective of church school. I stayed in big church, and she went downstairs to teach. That is, until our son John was getting older, and I had heard about the church's human sexuality class called Our Whole Lives, OWL. I asked about it, and then I was asked if I wanted to teach it. Since I wanted to know what John was going to learn, I said yes. If you do not know the program, it is comprehensive. The curriculum is 27 sessions. Each session is 90 minutes. Very comprehensive. I'm gratified to see the young families coming to church, and I like how welcoming the church is. The inclusion, where everyone is welcome. And the adaptive changes of pews, ramps, hearing aids, Zooming. I've been on many committees. My first committee was membership, which served to teach me who was a longtime member and who was just visiting. And it wasn't long before I felt that I have community here, and that my connection to this church was deepened by being part of a small group ministry. Nancy Delano, who you may remember, a lifelong UU, told me, you don't get to know someone until you've washed dishes with them. And that was so true. I think it's still true for working on the summer fair, too, and for any number of church activities. So I suggest, to deepen your connection, join a committee. Volunteer at the church fair. It's a lot of fun, and I promise you, you'll get to know others in the congregation a lot better. And please, save the date, April 7th. The Stewardship Committee is inviting the congregation for a sit-down lunch. And I ask you to join me in considering what financial commitment we can make to foster a healthy, vibrant church. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It was almost exactly 4 years ago, it was, that most of our congregations, as well as most of everything else, shut down for the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll say a little more about this in the service, but I am this morning, in this moment of gratitude, filled with gratitude, very grateful for all of our people who kept our congregations together and came through the worst of that intact, and with a sense that maybe we're really coming back a bit now. And if you think about, today is also a transition Sunday when we're reflecting on history in the congregation, and if you think about the long history of a congregation like this, you sort of stand in awe of how many times they were faced with crises like this, wars, other pandemics, droughts, floods. And so maybe we can this morning all be grateful for all of our ancestors who made it possible by just holding on that we're here today. Morning offering will now be given and gratefully received. This morning, two members of the transition team, Pat and Caroline, are going to share a reading with you. It's not a reading about this church in spite of the title. It's a reading about every church, and therefore, of course, about this one and the next one. The people in it are not specifically real people, I'm sure, but the truth of it will come through.
One day, your church was born.
Maybe it was a gathering of saints all together for the common worship of a restful God, ceaselessly praying between bouts of the flying evil of Christmas or dancing.
Or maybe a few brave souls answered a notice in the newspaper, curiosity piqued by the announcement of a religion where free thinking and tolerance were bedrocks.
No matter how it happened, your church was born. A gathering of people, humble, caring, anxious, and working, all at the same time, who covenanted to be with one another on the journey of life, death, and everything in between.
And so it began, a faithful few, beautifully imperfect, called to that central task, that human task of connecting, loving, and serving.
It was just a baby, and yet it was thrust deep into the human condition, tasked to hold minds and souls, bodies and hearts, along the roller derby of disease and war, infighting and joy and Christmas pageants, sometimes all those at the same time.
They gathered to heal the world broken open for insightful sermons, rejuvenating music, and a community whose fierce devotion to each other's well-being rivaled a mama bear's for her cubs.
But it wasn't always like that, of course. There were the trying times, and I don't just mean Phyllis or Jack, those stubborn but lovable souls who inhabit the netherworld of committee meetings. No, I mean the trying times.
When the church almost split in half over the war or integration, or when the mill left the town vacant, or when the minister crossed the line and people couldn't speak about it for decades.
But somehow you are still here, still on the town common, still the church that everyone recognizes, still the ones that show up every time you are called on, still using the communion silver until you voted to sell it.
New people came, and they changed things. Small things, big things. Things that nobody noticed as it happened until suddenly it was hard to even recognize anything anymore. That was a hard moment, a tearful moment.
And other things changed too. The proclamations about God, once heard loud from the pulpit, softened. Wrathful became loving. Distant became intimate. Mandatory became optional.
After the war, the nursery and RE classrooms were overflowing. Each baby dedicated reminded the church of the incredible beauty of life and the gift of this community, all huddled around baby, would bestow upon this child.
The history of your church is more a story of the determination of love to break forth than it is about of tie-dye or chalices, sermon discussions, or social justice committee meetings.
The history of the church is the history of human enterprise, evolving in its sights and sounds, yet revolving always around its core.
The history of your church is the gift of potential and momentum, of baggage and personality. The history of your church is the launchpad from which you spring into action or disarray.
Each day, your church is born.
Would you join, please, in a spirit of prayer and meditation, attention, intention. These words from Rayla D. Matson. Spirit of life, may we never forget the road our ancestors paved for us. May we honor and uplift them. May we also remember that we too will one day be ancestors to those generations that follow. And may they be proud of and honored by the road we have paved for them, whether or not they choose to follow it. And now let us hold in our hearts the losses of these last years in the light of this community as we enter into the silence. May our hopes and dreams take flight on the wings of love. Amen. Blessed be. Thank you for another beautiful piece by a woman composer in this Women's History Month. In 1897, Paul Gauguin finished a painting titled, "Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going?" Gauguin found himself in crisis, experiencing a series of illnesses, mounting debt, and the death of his daughter far away in Europe. He was in Tahiti. According to some sources, he planned to end his life, but first he wanted to paint his own personal mythological response to the enduring questions of existence. The result was the complex symbolic masterpiece now owned by the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, which Ed and Nancy got a chance to actually see a couple of days ago. The questions are universal, and most religious traditions have evolved to answer just such questions. At times of transitions in our lives, when we move to one stage from another, we too set off on our path, sometimes with similar kinds of reflections, more local ones. And just now at First Parish Church, we are looking at where do we come from in the sense of understanding what has shaped the current living congregation over the past few decades. The purpose is that so you as a congregation can see those patterns and make more informed and aware choices in the future. It's like understanding your family history so that you can play to the strengths and interrupt the defeating tapes. And so it was that your transition team, which is participating in the service today, asked you, as ushers and reading, asked you to respond to two questions. During your time here, whether it's 3 years or 50-some years, what have been the important transformational events? And what have been the challenges? And obviously your answers varied, but here's the thing. The most striking pattern or truth to emerge, to me at least, from your collective answers is that the same events that challenged this congregation also often became the source of transformation and strength for good. Hardships, rapid changes from the outside, conflict over values or decisions, all of those can lead to growth depending on how we deal with them and how we treat each other. One of the most dramatic events, of course, was one shared over the entire planet, which thrust millions of people into the reality of Gauguin's existential questions. The COVID-19 pandemic. The trauma and losses of that time linger, not only for individual people and families, but for communities, for congregations. Some of our Unitarian Universalist congregations were devastated by the total effects of COVID, and some have even dissolved. In your answers, your responses, you acknowledge that First Parish was changed, perhaps forever, by the months of being able to not gather in person, the drifting away of individuals or families, especially young people. But many also consider the experience transformational in tapping resilience. You did what you needed to do to keep people safe and to enable those who had the emotional bandwidth to stay in touch. That includes gathering virtually, and although we all thought we'd be done with Zoom as soon as possible, it has become part of our life together, bringing people who cannot attend physically into this room for worship or into a meeting has actually helped us live our values of inclusiveness as Unitarian Universalist and might serve as a pattern, as a call to action in other areas. And your leaders, the people who serve on your lay pastoral team, all of you who helped to look after each other, as well as your former minister, Reverend Catherine Cullen, deserve credit for getting this congregation, at least the good core of it, through that crisis. Better than some came through. On the congregational level, you have also experienced conflict as both a big challenge and a transformational event, and a perfect instance, you know I had to talk about it, is the congregation's decision a few years ago to move the tablets bearing the Ten Commandments and from the Hebrew Bible and the Sermon on the Mount from the New Testament. For those of you who are new, for decades, those large pieces were that are hanging in the choir loft, now hung on either side of the pulpit in the front. When the people of First Parish reached a point of deciding whether to move them, feelings became, I take it, intense. Seeing the tablets as part of the historic legacy of the church, some wanted them left exactly where they were, believing that the congregation's theology had long ago moved in a different direction. Others wanted to eliminate them entirely. In the end, after disagreement and discussion, you chose a third way and placed them back there. I know those of you on Zoom can't see. You can call it compromise if you want, but it goes deeper to learning how to live together pluralistically, how to live together in your differences. While the outcome may be different, a similar persistence happened when you decided whether to raise a Black Lives Matter banner. That decision took a long series of sometimes recalibrated processes. It took 2 votes, in fact. But that's, in truth, I can tell you how significant, difficult decisions are made in congregations. No one ever promised us that life in a community of value and meaning would be easy. At least not all of it. I have often told boards and congregations that getting through difficult times with honesty and compassion, those 2 things together, deepens your bond, it deepens your spirit, it makes all the work we do worthwhile. I have seen it, and I believe that wholeheartedly. Conflict and creation can go hand in hand if we bring to them our respect and caring for each other, if we lift up our purpose, and if we value not just the opinion of ourselves as individuals, but the integrity of the community itself. The great Universalist preacher Hosea Ballou offered some of the best wisdom that I've tried to pass on in transitional ministry. If we agree in love, Ballou said, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. And on this similar theme, others cited a change in governance and the way your board operates as another example of greater relational skill rising out of challenge. If I understand correctly, a time came when you needed to find a way to disagree and make decisions with more order and kindness, and a change of governance helped. And we're working now on a challenge some of you have cited about how we deal with personnel issues. It's essential to our understanding of who we are and the value and integrity of each person, that we treat employees fairly and coherently with guidance and clear expectations. That's why governance in a spiritual community is not just a superficial matter. How we make decisions, how we talk to each other, how we steward our spirit, our souls, our resources, including human beings, lay and professional, need to be based on our principles and the wider world's best practices. And of course, through all the decisions and changes and losses, leadership has been important. That includes lay leadership, which many people mention, but a great number of you raised up and mentioned ministers. And let's acknowledge here in a time of transition, it's hard. It's hard when a minister or other religious professional of many years leaves. For some people, that person's always going to be the special one. And for others, it's someone else. No one underestimates the importance of ministerial leadership in a congregation that has had ministers for nearly 400 years. But as a minister, I was touched. I've got to tell you, I was touched by the number of you who say that you had two recent long-term ministers who brought very different gifts to this congregation, who were very different, yet you valued both, and the congregation benefited from both. Keep that ability to widen your embrace close during the upcoming ministerial search. It's one of your greatest assets in finding a minister and in beginning an effective ministry with that person. You know, as I've sat with your responses over the past few weeks, what they bring home to me at least is that owning our history, understanding it and learning from it, and that's what I mean by owning it, depends on having faith. Faith that how we respond to what happens, to what's beyond our control, or what we decide to do that has unexpected repercussions, how we respond makes a huge difference. When we follow a creative path, we can turn challenges into growth. When we find new solutions to seemingly either-or alternatives, solutions that embody respect, we can actually live the tolerance and pluralism that we like to claim, but aren't always comfortable with. And when we do, we actually develop congregational health and spiritual maturity. And you know what? Those never come simply from years in existence or money in the endowment or even a beautiful building. They come from the deep moments. I hope you will hold that firmly in your vision over the next few years for this reason. Many of you stated clearly that First Parish Church has been challenged in recent decades, by declining membership and declining participation in religious education. And so we circle back to the pandemic, for like it, these are challenges that you as a congregation share with others, almost everyone else across the country. As our society has become more secular, as distrust for institutions understandably mounts, as lives have become more hectic, religious community has simply dropped as a priority. It's also true that the passing of time brings generational change in what inspires people, what expresses people's longings and hope. The challenge of diversity in words or music or programming that people feel is real. And whatever it is, no one has to justify or apologize for what speaks to their spirit. But as a whole, congregation must have faith that challenges can be sources of transformation and discovery. And what is called from you, by me, is to accept and remember that what happens here is part of what happens beyond these walls. And to acknowledge that. However much you cherish your past, and I would cherish it if I were you, new ways will evolve and emerge if you're open to them. There's no monolith of history that's always been in every stage of its storied past. This congregation has dealt with new suggestions, new longings, new debates, new arguments, new discovery, new growth. That's how you know you're still alive. Where do we come from and where are we going? Great artists and philosophers provide intriguing ideas and images and compositions. But the lived answers look much more like the reading that Pat and Caroline shared today than they do like a masterpiece. They can be found every time we gather together in reflection, or every time we gather to celebrate a life well lived, like that of the Reverend Betsy Stevens, who died this week, and who was almost every Sunday that I've been here sitting there on the front. They take form when we comfort one another during trauma, or when in disagreements and differences we lean toward creation. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us injury. My friends, you have good and tested bonds. Value them, keep them strong, and let them hold you together on the path. Our closing song today in the Teal hymnal is number 1020. Our soul singers are going, you tell us whether, is it better for you to just sing it or should we stand and try to sing too? Sing, all right, so stand up, get those Teal books out, turn to page 1020. And I'm trying to remember how it's pronounced. Woyaya? 1020 in the Teal blue hymnal. As we bring to a close our tribute to the journey made through the years, let us be mindful of the enduring bond that keeps us together. Let us remember those who went before and paved the road for us to travel. Let us remember our pioneers with admiration and gratitude, with honor and with joy. Memories are for us to cherish and to share. The future is for us to mold together. Let us be about that work. The words of Priscilla Murdoch.